Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. As a Christian, we are called to follow biblical principles that guide our lives as well as those of our families. As Christian parents, we are to raise our children with Christian principles and help them become godly adults. We're specifically required to do that in the Bible. When the government steps in and tries to become our children's parents, well, we have a serious problem. And an investigative report by Megan Brock of the Daily Wire says that Nicole was shocked when the police turned up at her front door to take her 15-year-old daughter away. In July of 2024, the Oregon Department of Human Services took the teen. They call it Jane Doe in filings to protect her identity, of course. And they took her into protective custody as they investigated whether Nicole was causing Jane a, quote, mental injury, unquote, which is a form of child abuse under Oregon state law. This issue, the issue at hand here, Nicole would not affirm Jane's gender identity. Quote, I asked, what if I don't let her go? This is what Nicole told the Daily Wire. And she said, then you can be arrested, is what the police officer told her. Nicole says Jane had identified as transgender for several years, but she and her husband are Christians who acknowledge the biological reality that you can't change your sex. And after performing its investigation, Oregon DHS sent Nicole a notice in September of 2024 saying it had found the claim that she caused her daughter a mental injury for not affirming her transgender identity was founded. Quote, we believe you, Nicole, are responsible for the mental injury of Jane Doe. This is what the document from the Oregon DHS reads. It says, your actions and statements toward Jane Doe have caused significant mental injury. The severe harm perpetrated showed a serious disregard for Jane Doe's social and emotional well-being. Your adverse reactions to Jane Doe expressing their gender identity have caused serious harm to Jane Doe's psychological functioning, unquote. Well, Oregon defines emotional abuse as any mental injury to a child that shall include only observable and substantial impairment of the child's mental or psychological ability to function caused by cruelty to the child. Well, Nicole asked Oregon DHS to review and reconsider her case, and upon review, Oregon DHS again said Nicole's refusal to support Jane's gender identity had caused her a mental injury. Quote, the decision was based on the following. You refused to support Jane Doe's gender identity and instead provided hours-long lectures that have led to Jane Doe experiencing panic attacks and suicidal ideation. Your action and behaviors have caused a severe negative impact on Jane Doe's well-being. That's what the document states. Now, Nicole told the Daily Wire that Jane now lives with her gender-affirming father. Quote, because I tell them she's a girl and I won't say that she's a boy whatsoever, they won't let me have a relationship with my daughter. They took all of my parenting rights away. She's not wrong here. Quote, Nicole's story is not unusual. Parents' rights advocate Aaron Friday says that gender-confusing kids are being groomed by adults to use the child welfare apparatus to escape from the only parent who truly has the child's best interests in mind. The system that was designed to safeguard kids has morphed into a lethal weapon against loving parents. Now, Nicole is now going to court to clear the names of her and her husband, who was also named as having founded charges of emotional abuse. Her case is set to go before a judge in September of this year. Quote, I gave birth to a beautiful, loving little girl, and that she will always and forever, no matter what she does to her body, will be a girl. Now my husband and I are in a battle with the state to clear our names because we didn't lie to our daughter and tell her that she is a boy. This has cost us thousands of dollars and more headache than I can't begin to place into words, and with no end in sight. Well, the Oregon is known for its radical embrace of gender ideology. It adopted a groundbreaking policy in 2018 requiring child foster care parents to and adoptive families to, quote, respect, accept, and support, unquote, a child's gender identity. Gender identity is a term used by transgender activists to describe a person's feelings about their sex. Activists view not affirming a child's gender identity as a form of abuse and neglect. And this rule shares similarities with a now rescinded Biden-era federal regulation that required all foster care families to provide transgender affirming environments for LGBTQ plus youth. Now, Jessica Bates, a Christian Oregon mom as well, sued Oregon DHS in 2023 after she was barred from having to adopt, from applying to adopt children because of her objections to affirming a child's transgender identity. This is what the legal documents show. And Bates, who was represented by legal counsel from the Alliance Defending Freedom, or the ADF, it initially lost her case, but won on appeal and received a preliminary injunction in July of last year, allowing her to move forward with foster and adoption processes. Quote, this was really the first appellate circuit court decision ever to address the issue. And we think it reads very strongly in favor of free speech and religious liberties. But John Scruggs, the ADF vice president of litigation strategy, told the Daily Wire, quote, just because someone refuses to affirm gender identity, you can't deny their ability to foster and adopt. And if that's true, I think it certainly flows into biological parents as well. That, if anything, biological parents have even stronger rights and adoption applications. Well, the Oregon DHS Resource and Adoptive Family Training, or RAFT, for foster and adoptive families has a session devoted to training caregivers to create affirming homes. Quote, you will learn about what it means to affirm, respecting, accepting, and supporting children's identities and practice affirmation in the resource home. That's what the training actually states. The training makes it clear that parents and caregivers must actively affirm a child's gender identity by using correct pronouns, as they call it, and ensuring a child has clothes that match their chosen sex. Now, in the final opinion in the Bates case, the judge noted that Oregon trained foster and adoptive parents to not only be tolerant of a child's gender identity, but also to proactively be affirming. Quote, the state's own denial of Bates's application shows that the state does not interpret its policy and the RAFT guidelines as merely advisory. The state thus cites or cited Bates' refusal to encourage children in this behavior as grounds for denying her certification as an adoptive parent, is what the opinion states. So, Oregon's child welfare policies aren't limited to the foster care and adoptive system. They also affect children residing at home with their parents, as we've seen. The logic of the state's argument in the foster context is parents are endangering children's lives by refusing to affirm gender ideology. That logic crosses right over to biological parents. And so that's one of the reasons we're litigating this issue across the country, is what Scruggs said. ADF is providing legal counsel to foster adoptive parents across the country who are being discriminated against for not affirming gender ideology. And in October of 2023, Oregon DHS received a call concerned about Jane's safety while under Nicole's care. And in Oregon, DHS report written by a caseworker noted that in that case, Jane was, quote, currently wanting to transition from female to male, and that Nicole was, quote, not supportive of this, unquote. The caseworker pointed out that Nicole and her husband believe men are men and women are women. Can you believe such a thing? Well, Jane had continued to identify as a boy, and in May of 2024, out of concern for her well-being, Nicole asked Jane to watch videos showing the harms of gender ideology. And actually, Nicole told the Daily Wire that she and Jane spent around 2 hours watching the videos. They ate dinner and went to bed. And that evening, it seemed uneventful. Well, the next morning, Jane headed off to her public school. But when Nicole went to pick her up at the end of the day, she was nowhere to be found. And Nicole spent almost 2 hours frantically trying to locate her and even called 911 to report her daughter as missing. And she was directed to a police officer who said Jane went home with a friend because she felt threatened by the gender ideology videos that Nicole had shown her the night before. The police officer brought Jane to Nicole with the order, this was an order, that she take her daughter to an emergency crisis center. And at the center, counselors offered Nicole pamphlets about resources for LGBTQ plus community members, which she refused, because obviously she's a Christian. Okay. Well, the Oregon Department of Education in January 2023 released a 48-page document titled Supporting Gender Expansive Students, Guidance for Schools. And this guidance for schools, which provides practical ways for schools to be gender affirming, was given there. The department provides a template to help school staff create gender identify support plans and recommendations that school staff keep secrets about students' gender ideology. And of course, we've seen case after case where this is what's happening. They keep the secret just to themselves, just the school and the child, not the parents, especially those that aren't supportive. So while Nicole and her husband tried to reason with Jane at home, the teenager's school had been providing her with information about LGBTQ plus identities, and her teachers were calling her by a different name, and her peers pressured her into transitioning to another sex. Nicole said that schools, outside counselors, children's friends, phones, echo chambers within social media, and affirming family members all influenced Jane's embrace of transgender identity. And Nicole believed that in June of 2024, Jane was actually starting to see some of the harms of transgenderism. But this change of heart was short-lived, which Nicole believes was due in part to the influence of a Christian counselor that Jane was seeing for helping addressing her underlying struggles. The counselor advertised herself as having a Christian worldview, and Nicole specifically asked the counselor not to discuss LGBTQ plus issues with Jane. Well, the Daily Wire reviewed a document that suggests the Christian counselor supported Jane's transgender identity and told Oregon DHS their main concern, this is a quote, their main concern is the parents have really particular beliefs about LGBTQ, unquote. Yeah. And the counselor even told a caseworker, quote, Mom had the perception that since she is listed as a Christian counselor, that she would be against LGBTQ, unquote. According to the Oregon DHS report. And while Jane used her tablet to access an online gender support group, the Christian counselor was really proud of Jane for reaching out to somebody when she felt she needed help, according to the report. Nicole told the Daily Wire that the counselor's office was where a lot of the issues occurred. And after Jane was taken into state custody in July of 2024, the Department of Human Services sent letters to Nicole's family members, alerting them that Jane needed a place to live. Gender-affirming child welfare systems seek to find chosen affirming families for transgender identifying children whose parents refuse to transition them to another sex. Nicole said that this action was devastating and it was isolating and harmed her family relationships. Quote, CPS sent letters to my entire family saying, are you willing to take Nicole's daughter? Because basically she's unfit, unquote. It's been almost 2 years since CBS showed up at her door in July of 2024. And that was the last time Nicole saw her daughter. Quote, we lost her to the state when she was 15, along with all of my parenting rights, is what Nicole said. She said, we just want to bring awareness out there to parents everywhere that this is happening. And as we've seen, as it said, this is not an uncommon occurrence, unfortunately. Can you imagine your child being ripped out of your house because you espouse Christian principles? And in fact, if we look at this closer, it's now coming out that this is part of the plan. Shortly before the 2024 presidential election, Donald Trump's campaign dropped a game-changing ad. And it said, quote, Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you. Well, it has since become clear that Trump's embrace of the transgender issue helped fuel his return to the White House. But what if, Vice President Kamala Harris had eked out a victory? Would her administration have continued President Joe Biden's embrace of radical gender ideology? Would she have walked it back? Or would Harris have taken things even further? Well, a 78-page plan, which was reviewed by the Daily Wire, shows how the Biden administration was planning to make affirming transgenderism the national standard within child welfare services without having without even having to pass a single law. The crux of that plan was to create it was the creation of the Child Welfare Sexual Orientation Gender Identity Expression Institute, okay? Or we can just call it SOGIE for short. Funded by a $20 million grant from the Department of Health and Human Services, SOGIE was on track to employ a 40-person team to push transgenderism on children welfare agencies across the country. Quote, "This is a comprehensive, detailed strategy to turn children welfare systems in all 50 states into training camps and havens for radical gender ideology." This is what Laura Hanford, the senior policy analyst at the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Human Flourishing, told the Daily Wire. She said, "Not a word about the major risks of sexual rejecting procedures or about the comorbidities for gender confusion and its high correlation with sexual abuse, especially in such a vulnerable population. Even the people behind the plan acknowledge its radical nature." Angela Weeks, who's a University of Connecticut employee tasked with administering the SOGIE grant, wrote to colleagues in August of 2024 that, quote, "We wrote a proposal that was innovative, so much so that some other reviewers thought we should tone it down," unquote. "But we chose to go big," is what Weeks said, adding that it was thrilling to see the Administration of Children and Families, or ACF, an agency within HHS. She goes, "I wanted a contractor who would lead this work in a way that can create real change," unquote. Well, the Biden administration first mentioned the SOGIE Institute in January 2023 when HHS announced it was looking for a contractor to help its Children's Bureau address the unique needs of transgender and gender diverse individuals in the child welfare system. And this was pursuant to Biden's executive order 14075, which mandated the federal government combat unlawful discrimination and address the significant disparities that LGBTQ plus youth face in the foster care system, unquote. Well, the SOGIE Institute cited this order in its project work plan and stated it offered an unprecedented opportunity to make children welfare services more responsive to the unique needs of LGBTQIA2S plus youth and their families. Well, it called President Biden's LGBTQ plus affirming foster care rule an inflection point, changing child welfare agencies to take radical action. In the fall of 2024, the SOGIE Institute set about transforming local and state child welfare agencies across the nation. And the draft work plan outlines 5 years worth. That's what I said, 5 years worth of initiatives, including efforts to collect data about the sexual orientation and gender identity of children in the foster care program, and trainings to help child welfare workers maximize SOGIE's knowledge and practice competencies. We covered this a little bit on Friday's podcast. Now, the Institute also had plans to handpick child welfare workers from state and local agencies to participate in what they called SOGIE Champions program, where they would participate in a robust training and coaching program that teaches the skills and knowledge necessary to implement evidence-informed LGBTQIA2S plus best practices. Well, Biden officials were particularly interested in recruiting champions, again, as they called them, from child welfare systems to conservative states that opposed President Biden's LGBTQ plus affirming foster care rule. This is what the records show. They show that Liliana Chakrabarty, I guess is how you pronounce her last name. She's a child welfare program specialist at the Children's Bureau, and told SOGIE leaders that her staff had created a list of potential allies in 20 states whose attorneys general had opposed the rule. And this was an August 2024 email. Now, the SOGIE Institute planned to welcome its first group of SOGIE champions in January of 2025. The Institute also planned to recruit and train lived experienced consultants who had been supported by child welfare systems and identified as LGBTQIA2S plus or are parents or caregivers of LGBTQIA2S plus young people, as they put it. Well, these individuals could consult with local child welfare agencies and help them embrace gender-affirming policies. Isn't that nice? The SOGIE Institute only operated for 6 months, though. But during that time, the group hosted webinars on supporting LGBTQIA2S plus youth people and their families receiving child welfare services, and 10 tips, this is the quote, 10 tips on fostering safety for LGBTQIA2S plus youth in foster care, unquote. Well, the tips included using non-gendered language, hanging pride flags in child welfare offices, and introducing yourself using chosen pronouns. The group published a glossary of terms that defined each letter of the LGBTQIA2S plus acronym, saying it would be used, quote, for all the work throughout the administration of children and families, and also provided definitions of terms such as queer, transgender, and transition, unquote. Child welfare is already widely tainted by gender ideology, is what Hanford told the Daily Wire, and said one can only imagine how much more thoroughly this $20 million plan would have rotted child protective systems, and how many more families would have been destroyed had President Trump not won the election and halted the project. The plan, the work plan showed one of the long-term goals of the SOGIE Institute was to address the problem of overrepresentation of LGBTQIA2S plus in the foster care. But Liliana Chakrabarty, I guess is, again, I know I'm slaughtering it, but she recommended that the SOGIE Institute focus on a more realistic goal. Quote, I think more realistic long-term goal would be increasing satisfaction of services by LGBTQIA2S plus youth in care, is what she said. Transgender activists believe not supporting a child's transgender identity is a form of harm and abuse, and parents across the country, including in California, Indiana, and Maryland, have had their children taken away by child welfare services for affirming their child's sex. Well, Aaron Friday, a lawyer and president of Our Duty USA, told the Daily Wire that gender-affirming child welfare systems are unnecessarily increasing the number of kids in foster care. Quote, the child welfare system was designed as a safety net for abused children, with family reunification as its primary goal. But Friday said it has since morphed into a system that wants to add to the foster care ledger. Quote, the primary beneficiaries are LGBTQ affiliated nonprofits that can then seek additional taxpayer funding. This scheme simultaneously uses the increased numbers to justify the false notion that parents are abandoning their gender dysphobic children. Under President Trump's HHS has alerted all 50 states that affirming biological reality does not constitute child abuse or neglect under the federal law. Quote, removing a child from their home must be based on objective evidence or imminent risk of serious harm. So a state's decision to break up a family cannot be based solely on a parent's objection to radical gender ideology or irreversible sex rejecting medical interventions. This is what Alex Adams said. He's the assistant secretary for the ACF. And despite this recommendation, few states have clarified their legal code to ensure that affirming a child's sex is not labeled as a form of child abuse. Many American parents who won't affirm the transgender identity of their child are at risk of losing custody of their kids to the state. And President Trump canceled that $20 million SOGIE Institute contract on January 2025 with the executive order of the 14151, which eliminated diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And of course, this grant that was the $20 million SOGIE grant. But despite the loss of funding, members of the group have continued to push their views. And before the creation of Biden's SOGIE Institute, Weeks was the director of a collaborative of transgender activist organizations that provides guidance and training to child welfare agencies implementing gender-affirming policies called the National SOGIE Center. Yeah. Partners of the collaborative include the Human Rights Campaign and Lambda Legal. The National SOGIE Center has continued to produce LGBTQ plus resources and published a Coming Out with Care guidebook in the fall of 2025. So I wanted to bring you all this to basically show you that that parental rights are under attack, and it's under attack by our own government. And you can see what the Biden administration was trying to do with this SOGIE Institute. They were trying to step in and be our own children's parent, because us as Christian parents, we just don't know what's best for our children, and thus we abuse our children. So this is the type of thing when people say, well, elections, my vote doesn't really matter. It does, because in this case, it completely changed what was happening at the SOGIE Institute. Donald Trump was able on day one to get rid of this thing, and it has made a difference, and it continues to make a difference, because as parents, as Christian parents, we need the ability to be able to parent our kids in a biblical and godly fashion. I would love to hear what you think about it. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening.
This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.